It was Christmas in 1978 when TV screens around the world were filled with the horror story of John Wayne Gacy. Police found the remains of 29 young men buried in the backyard of a suburban Chicago home. The yard belonged to a 36-year-old contractor named John Wayne Gacy. In addition to the bodies buried in his crawlspace, Gacy confessed to killing at least 4 others and disposing of them in the nearby Des Plaines River. He frequently did volunteer work dressed as a clown at hospitals and charity institutions, but behind this clown facade was a terrible serial killer. In this video, I will tell you about this terrifying man. But before I do, I want to ask you to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss any videos. Like many other notorious serial killers, Gacy's childhood was filled with abuse. In an interview with Oprah, Gacy's sister Karen described their father as a mean drunk who would beat Gacy because he was too effeminate. During the trial, the defense argued that Gacy's twisted relationship with his father laid the groundwork for his antisocial personality. John was abused by his father, who would ridicule him in front of his sisters and other children in the neighborhood. In his father's eyes, he was a sissy who would never amount to anything in the future. His father wanted a tough, masculine son. Instead, he saw many feminine qualities in Gacy. He struggled for years to please his father, but no matter how hard he tried, his efforts were unsuccessful. He has said that his mother was the only one who made his life bearable. She gave him all the love he never received from his father. John was 29 years old when he first committed murder in 1972. His victim was the 16-year-old Timothy Jack McCoy, who was nearby during a stopover on a bus trip. However, Gacy's crimes began much earlier. David Bolton was only 10 years old when he met Gacy, who was a teenager at the time. The pair were out walking when John sexually assaulted him and threatened to kill him if he didn't keep his mouth shut. He continued to attack others before turning to murder. Gacy used various manipulative tactics to trap his victims, even pretending to be a police officer. In the 1970s, he started a construction business, which allowed him to build connections with local authorities and also provided a cover when he was looking for victims, as he could offer them work. The worst of his manipulations came through a magic trick that led his victims to handcuff themselves, after which he could abuse and murder them while dressed in his clown costume. Between 1972 and 1978, he murdered at least 33 boys and men, most of whose bodies were found under his house in Chicago. Gacy's victims were often young men whom he lured with promises of work or money. He sexually abused them and eventually strangled them with a rope or ligature. Some victims were also raped or tortured before being killed. All of Gacy's known victims were young men, younger than 30 years old, but some were still children, with the youngest being only 14 years old. Samuel Stapleton was walking home from his sister's house when he disappeared, and Michael Marino went missing with his friend, 16-year-old Kenneth Parker. Randall Reffitt and Robert Piest were both only 15, and many of his other victims were younger than 18. In 1964, Gacy married and became a manager in his father-in-law's restaurant. The couple had 2 children, but in 1968, Gacy was sentenced to 10 years in prison for molesting a teenage boy. His wife demanded a divorce, and he never saw her or the children again. After 18 months, Gacy was released for good behavior and moved to a Chicago suburb. In 1972, he married again, and his wife and stepdaughters moved in with him. However, Gacy's dark side took over. Eventually, he didn't even try to hide his homosexual pornography and sexual escapades from his wife. Meanwhile, the stench from the crawlspace became increasingly strong. In 1976, 2 years before his arrest, the couple separated. For many people, John Wayne Gacy was a friendly man who enjoyed entertaining young children. He often dressed up as his alter ego, Pogo the Clown, at parties he organized for his entire neighborhood. After his conviction, he earned the ominous nickname, the Killer Clown. John explained to the police that he had multiple personalities, one of which was the balloon clown Pogo, and another was the police officer Jack, who hunted young men in the streets of Chicago at night. Jack didn't like homosexuals and sometimes killed them. He would stop at a cruising spot and pretend to be a police officer. He would ask for their identification and then put a gun to their head before forcing the victim into his car. During his interrogation with the police, he was asked if he also had sex with his victims after killing them. John replied, "Not me, but Jack maybe." After an intensive search for evidence, Gacy was ultimately arrested and charged with the murders. During the trial, which lasted nearly 2 months, the gruesome details of Gacy's crimes were uncovered. The evidence against Gacy was overwhelming. More than 30 bodies were found in his yard and in the crawl space of his home, and there was also evidence that he had killed other victims and buried their bodies elsewhere. Gacy attempted to claim insanity, but the judge did not believe this and found him guilty of 33 murders. On March 13, 1980, Gacy was sentenced to death for his crimes. John Wayne Gacy remained in prison until his execution on May 10, 1994. His crimes have had a lasting impact on the community and the families of his victims. When he was in the death row of the prison in Illinois in 1982, John Wayne Gacy had access to painting supplies. Until his death in 1994, he painted like a maniac in his cell, creating over 2,000 works in total. Despite the mediocre quality, there was a high demand for his art, which was even sold by renowned galleries. Gacy's art consists of a large number of self-portraits in clown costumes and paintings of human skulls. He also depicted the legendary gangster John Dillinger. There was a lot of demand for Gacy's art. His most expensive painting, a self-portrait with a clown costume and claws, was sold for $20,000. In recent years, there has been more resistance to Gacy's art. Would you buy his art? Let us know in the comments. After his arrest and conviction to the death penalty, his brain was examined to try to understand what drove him to commit these gruesome acts. The examination of Gacy's brain aimed to find any abnormalities that could explain his behavior. Researchers discovered that Gacy did not have any significant abnormalities in his brain that could explain his criminal behavior. Several theories were put forward about what motivated Gacy. Some suggested that he suffered from a personality disorder, while others believed that he was simply a sadist who enjoyed torturing and murdering young men. It was also speculated that his childhood traumas and abuse contributed to his behavior as an adult. Whatever the reason for his actions, research into Gacy's brain continued to gain insight into the minds of serial killers and to try to prevent future crimes. Although the research did not provide definitive answers, it has contributed to our understanding of the complexity of criminal behavior and the importance of understanding the psychology behind such acts. Did this murderous clown scare you? Let us know in the comments.
I've always told people when I got into clown makeup, I regressed into childhood. It was fun being a clown because you could be yourself or just let yourself go and act a fool. You could be slapstick and funny and have a good time. That's why I always enjoyed clowning.
Thank you for watching. Subscribe to my channel and click on the bell so you don't miss any videos.